Zak Williams is in the studio today. I am so excited. Can you give our audience a little background on you?
Sure. I'm an Irish Italian Jew, and I'm a mental health advocate. I have been for about 5 years now. I started a company focused on mental health advocacy. It's called PIM, stands for Prepare Your Mind. And at this point in my life, outside of being a dad to my son, who's almost 2, and we're expecting another child.
Congratulations.
In 2 weeks. So I'm very excited for that. Most roads in my life lead to mental health advocacy. I care deeply about creating opportunities for access, parity, and quality, because everybody deserves the mental health care that they deserve.
When did you start seeing that there was a gap in our system with mental health? And it could be even something that you saw when you were 5 years old. Is there things that you can pinpoint of why you're on this journey with mental health that happened when you were younger?
Well, so I was a child of divorce. And as part of that divorce agreement, I started therapy really, really early on in life, around 4 years old.
And your parents put you in?
Yeah.
Wow.
And so, I didn't take very well to it. It was not something that just clicked. I didn't understand why I was doing it. I just thought it was an opportunity to play games and kind of hang out. Ultimately, that for young people in therapy, for kids in therapy, it's an opportunity to find kind of safe places and deal with all these conflicting feelings and things like that. But, for me, I didn't really understand the point of therapy or the idea of what mental health meant until a lot later, because for me, it was just the notion of mental illness and then everything else. And it's become very apparent to me that the term mental illness is something that ultimately was thrown around a lot earlier in my life, and not necessarily for me. I'm just saying, there was just mental illness and then everything else. And what became clear was that term had all the stigma associated with it, and therefore people didn't really understand or prioritize mental health as something that they need to take care of. It was just either you're fine or you're mentally ill. That's the world I grew up in. And I don't appreciate the term mental illness, because there's such nuance to the emotional dysregulation, the mental dysregulation that people deal with, that you need specificity associated with it. You're bipolar, you're schizophrenic, you're dealing with issues associated with addiction, you're anxious from time to time. It's just, you need that specificity so people can really understand what it is you're going through. And so for me, it was a long road to get to where I am today, in which I developed a deeper understanding of why the mental health system is broken for most people. And from my end, I had to experience a lot of things happening, trauma, my life spiraling out of control because of addiction, specifically to drugs and alcohol. And for me, that was all means of coping, just dealing with life and the anxiety and trauma that I had accrued over time. And so, I started understanding that, from my end, early on, I had access to care. I had access to things like therapy. And it became very clear that most people don't have the type of access that they need at all. Therapy is not accessible for most people, and there's not an awesome insurance environment to reimburse therapy as there should be for a number of reasons. And I think there's an openness and willingness to invest more resources, whether it comes from the public sector or communities or companies around mental health care. But, it just became so clear that 90% of people don't have the access to the quality care they need to just deal with life. Modern life is really challenging.
When did you start to notice that you were getting addicted to something? Is this when you're really young? Is it like a year ago? When did you start to notice your own journey with addiction?
Oh man. Well, so I had a lot of trouble sleeping as a kid. And, when I hit my teens and I discovered things like weed and alcohol, I found opportunities to kind of shut my brain down and rest. And so, periodically the alcohol abuse started early on in my life, my teens, but primarily as a way to find opportunities to kind of just shut my brain down because I was an anxious kid and I had kind of obsessive thinking and things like that. And it was a way to just kind of just turn the signal off. And, through my teens and 20s, it was something that I managed through. Not in a way that I would appreciate, not in a way that was enabled me to thrive. It was just something that I thought was part of my life, and I would keep on telling myself, oh, you're getting through this and you're doing what you need to do to get through it, whether it's drinking or whatever, what have you. And that's not a way to live one's life at all. It didn't really become apparent that the extent to which alcoholism could impact my life until my dad, who was the entertainer Robin Williams, died by suicide. At which point, the self-medicating to manage anxiety and to sleep and things like that suddenly became drinking to get through the day. Became extreme emotional dysregulation to the point where I couldn't really focus on anything for longer than a minute or so. There was this energy that was burning me out, and I felt myself burning out.
Speaking of your dad, my producer Taylor's yelling at us because we're hitting the table, and you're animated like your dad. It's kind of tripping me out here because, I'd be remiss to not say how big of fans we were. Like, we grew up watching your father, right? Like, it's just weird for me to look at you, say I look like Christian Bale in The Machinist, but I'm sitting there looking like this is like a spitting image. Having a father like that at that level of, fame, notoriety, so animated, like, what, as a kid, do you recognize like who that is, or you're just like, that's my dad? It's not, you don't just like when you think back, like, do you think like, well,
were you watching Hook?
Yeah, like,
well, so yes, I was watching Hook. I was on the set of Hook a good deal, which was amazing. First off, you don't look like Christian Bale in The Machinist. I would say more a Batman Christian Bale.
I'll take it.
Today he was acting like Christian Bale on the set when he was caught screaming at the crew.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, my producer back there, Taylor, we've known him since we were 12 years old, and bane of my existence, that guy. Yeah. But I love him.
He's a gentleman.
Yeah.
And scholar to be determined. So the thing from my end was growing up with my dad being who he was. You don't know any difference, right? So, I remember being, the highlights of being in his world when he was on set and things like that was like meeting Tony Danza at a Hollywood party. And like, for me, that was super out of the ordinary and unusual, because the life that I experienced growing up in the Bay Area in San Francisco was one where, I had my dad. We would spend time together as one would between, a parent and child, but I would then go out and see him on set in this exceptional environment.
And people forget, a lot of listeners forget, he was an exceptional stand-up comedian. Like, I think that a lot of people don't realize it because they see him from the movies, but like, he was something else on stage.
Yeah. This was his reason. He lived to entertain. And as part of that, it was something that was very sustaining for him. And when he had downtime, he needed to find ways to release that excess energy. So he was very focused on things like running and cycling and, also collecting. He was a big collector, many, many toys. So, that energy, that outlet where he would go out and he would entertain was his, I think, the most satisfying thing for him personally.
I think a lot of people don't realize how many people with such big personalities go home and have a dark side. Like Jim Carrey, for instance, he's someone that comes to mind. Is that something that you see a lot in the mental health space? People with these huge personalities that put it on and they entertain, but then they go home and it's almost like they have to recharge their batteries by going to a different side of them. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, when you go down a path of comedy, to get to that point, it's not a safe career. You don't choose to be a comic because you went to school for it. It just doesn't happen that way.
Not a lot of job security.
Right. No, well, there's not a lot of job security. You're going out and exposing yourself. You're being extremely vulnerable to a crowd that is literally judging you night after night on end. There's no money in it for most people initially for a long period of time. When I say a long period of time, it's not like 4 years, 5 years. There's comics that don't hit until 10 years, 15 years in. Some never hit. And it's freaking brutal. It's brutal, and so you develop these defense mechanisms in order to get through the day. I see amongst my friends and community who are comics and the like, depression is rampant. Addiction is rampant because you're going out and you're seeking validation from a crowd constantly. You don't always get that validation and you're out on the road. Meaning you're probably alone or, you're with a small isolated group of people and you're going out and you're in the middle of nowhere and you get up on stage and you're performing and you might get heckled. And, at the end of the day, you finish your set and you're alone, whether you're connecting.
You're not
with
like in a band or like what we're doing here. You have something to fall back on. It's you.
It's you. And you're going out and being judged constantly, consistently, and that takes its toll.
So when you're growing up, and you talk about trauma, like going to you personally, like it sounds like it's at a young age. Like, did you realize there was trauma, or was there something that was there an event that triggered something, or like what was defining that trauma a little bit so that we can understand what led you down the path of addiction?
Sure. I think I'm predisposed to having an addictive personality. It kind of runs in my family. I certainly experienced it with my dad, my parents, and an extended family through the generations. But there were traumatic events that helped catalyze other things. My first week of college as a freshman at New York University, September 2001.
Oh shit.
Yeah. And but you experience this event and you're 18 years old and you think this is just what happens when you go to college. Right. And so you think something of it, but you're exposed to these things and these events accrue. If you don't take care of it, you don't kind of unwind and kind of get rid of the plaque that builds up.
Well, I think it's good that, I think it's important to talk about being predisposed because I think people will look at someone who is, classified as an addict and they think they chose, not some people, I can, fortunately, personally, I can go out and I can have a couple drinks and then stop and not have, anything for 2 weeks. But I know there's some people in my family and Lauren's family that cannot do that, right? They're just they don't have that thing where they can, hey, I'm just going to stop and take it easy.
Yeah. For anyone listening in the audience, if you're the type of person who has 1 drink or 2 drinks and then to stop is excruciating, Like it's challenging because it's just
wired differently.
it's just how you are. That was my experience. But I also acclimated to it as being part of, my lifestyle very early on. I thought that someone who didn't drink, someone who didn't use drugs and alcohol was boring and not fun or engaging. I thought it was my dad who was sober for a good chunk of his life and my experiencing him. But that was an exception. Everything else was kind of like to live was to be the life of the party. To live was to be out and engaging with people. And, you suddenly take alcohol, you take drugs out of the equation, and then you're depriving yourself from actually being interesting.
That's part of your identity at that point. It's like, if I don't do this, people may not like me. It might not be as fun. And all of a sudden you're like, I might not be worth, or I'm worthless now without it. So it's like becomes part of something.
Yeah. It turns out people don't give a damn,
Yeah.
but when you're in the middle of it and when you're young and, you're living in New York or wherever, and you're seeking validation, you want to be seen. You want to be seen as someone that, people want to be around. That's what you do. I mean, in my case, but I was very insecure, and so I think, that insecurity compounds, the need to kind of numb and to get rid of that anxiety and the like. So
I find that suicide is so taboo. My mom committed suicide when I was 18. My sister was 12. In this interview, I knew it was going to be difficult for me to do because of the topic. I didn't have anyone to talk to when I was 18. I don't feel like it's changed that much. What advice would you give someone like me, or do you even not have any advice?
I have some advice, and it primarily relates to an organization I work with called Bring Change to Mind, which develops and delivers or deploys peer-to-peer mental health support communities in high schools throughout the United States. And it's find communities that get what you're going through.
Yeah, we have not done that, my sister and I, at all.
There are suicide survivor communities.
Is it depressing?
No, it doesn't need to be your life.
Yeah.
It doesn't. I mean, it can be if you want it to be. Some people really find these type of interest groups. I say interest groups, meaning, there's a community focused around a specific topic. And for mental health, this is really important. It can be an aspect of it, and for me personally, because of the advocacy work I do, I end up connecting with suicide survivor communities pretty often. And I need to hear stories. I need to hear what people go through because it's a shared experience. And often, with your core community, your group of friends and the like, they have empathy, but they might not really get what you're going through.
Yeah, because it's been made into such a taboo, uncomfortable topic that people don't want to talk about. They don't bring it up, which I understand. It's such a heavy topic, but at the same time, when my sister, who's 12 years old and I'm 18, and I know you were young too, when you don't have any resources or anyone to talk to, I think that's important to talk about the resources.
It's extremely important to talk about the resources.
When this is years and years ago, there was nothing. I don't remember anything besides like the yellow, maybe there was like yellow ribbon or something.
Well, not just that. I feel like people that don't know, if you haven't experienced something like that, you also don't know what to say to someone that you care about that's happened to.
Yeah, it's hard. Yeah. And, I'm sorry for your loss. It's really, really challenging, especially in the formative years, From my lens, there are communities focused on grief. And really what that comes down to is kind of the grief, but also suicide survivors and things like that. And finding opportunities to engage can be challenging, but I encourage people who go through traumatic experiences or deal with things like addiction to explore. I'm active in 12-step. I love it. It's important. It's an important part of my life, because otherwise I'd be really, really resentful, because it's frustrating sometimes when you're doing everything you need to do to take care of yourself and things aren't necessarily getting better.
Yeah, it's a different way to experience death, because there's other emotions than if someone dies of cancer, it's like you can pinpoint and be like, oh, but then with suicide, there's all these questions like, could I have done something? What was the last conversation? It goes on and on and on.
Yeah. So the shared experience I would have being a young person and dealing with suicide specifically actually related to my cousin dying by suicide.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. And I was 12 years old and he was 13.
Oh.
And this is when I was first exposed to the notion of suicide contagion, because Kurt Cobain was his idol.
Oh, wow.
Can you talk about that? I've heard about this, but I'd like to know more.
Yeah, it's a challenging subject to talk about. The idea of suicide contagion is seeing, whether it's in movies or TV or experiencing, a celebrity dying by suicide. Experiencing that encourages suicidal ideation in certain people. And as a result of that, it might lead to a boost in suicides because of bringing up the topic or showing ease of access or just affinity, that as I don't want to say a cool thing to do. That's not the best way to frame it, but just seeing as someone whom you admired not being able to manage or handle a situation or life, and as a result that person dies by suicide.
That's why it's so hard to talk about, though, because you tell me something like that and it's like, oh, then do you want to talk about it? But I think what you're also saying is sometimes it can glamorize it almost.
Well, in parallel to that,
in some ways, yeah.
In parallel to that, and this is also very hard, and I don't want to get so political here and talk, but I do think there's a media component to this, but you start to see the rise in something like shootings. And bear with me for a second. What I think is happening is there's a segment of people that will see someone perform a mass shooting, and there's somebody that'll see that and say, oh, this person got attention or they got this notoriety, and all of a sudden someone that was unknown is known, and maybe in some ways, this is not a pun, but triggers somebody to go and act in the same way. And it's almost like, at what point does the media need to sensationalize something like that or share it and let people know what's going on, compared to also amplify? And same thing with suicide. If you're taking somebody that has a group of people that idolize them, and then you're putting that on, I think you get into a dangerous spot here. It's what should we see and not see? And
I think in mass media and films and TV and the like, there is sometimes the topic is glamorized. And to be perfectly frank, I don't have an issue in the topic being brought up and even potentially glamorized. I do have an issue if there's not an opportunities to share resources or provide an audience with tools to manage this.
That's in everything. Even honestly, in the pandemic, it's we can see everything that's going on, but what are the tools and resources for people to protect themselves, learn more, have more awareness? I think what Lauren and I like to do here is shed light on topics that people don't necessarily shed light on, regularly, and also say, hey, if this is an issue, there's also potentially a solution. Because I do believe there's not to everything, but most things, there's a solution if you look hard enough for it.
Yeah. And the main thing for me is it's not about censure or, potentially
that doesn't work.
Glossing things over, because people will find a way to access information. What is important is to educate, and provide opportunities to either develop or share resources and engage in meaningful dialogue. It's those interactions that generate connections and healing and things like that, things that are helpful for people who go through very traumatic times. As I mentioned earlier, modern life is very challenging.
Sure, but you are someone that has we all have a unique experience, but a very unique experience in the sense that, like, take someone like a Britney Spears or your father. There's so much attention from the media, and it's almost like people forget at the end of the day that these people are humans, and that's got to be challenging at some level, both for the individual that has that amount of attention and also the people around it. Because, if Lauren and I have a family issue, we deal with it our family privately, but
Right.
Or a step further, I think the child.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But like for you, if you're, as a child, you're seeing all this, you're seeing someone like your dad that's, on every platform, people are talking about all the time. Same, like if you look at what's going on with Britney Spears right now, it's, people forget that these are humans at the end of the day.
With Britney, it's, I feel so bad for her because she's been in an extended state of isolation, like at times solitary confinement.
Yeah, it's scary.
For years. I feel for her.
But people think, oh, you're a celebrity, like that comes with the territory. But I'm like, is that really what comes with the territory?
There's the documentary that just came out, and there's this clip, and I cannot get it out of my head, where she's 5 months pregnant, and she gets out of the car, and there's obviously thousands of paparazzi around, and she's holding her 2-year-old in her hands. And she trips and falls, and she drops the 2-year-old a little bit because there's thousands of people around her and lights flashing. It was an accident because there's so many people around. And then people are snapping her dropping it, which looks like she's being a bad mom, even though it was because of the paparazzi. And she goes into a little diner in New York City, and she's alone, holding her 2-year-old, 5 months pregnant. And she's bawling, crying into her 2-year-old's shoulder. And everyone around her is taking pictures and laughing and pointing. That the diners, not the paparazzi, the diners. So I think it's our responsibility as human beings to be more humane with all of this. It's gotten out of control, in my opinion.
It is. Celebrity culture has now disseminated to social media, and I worry for people who find a living through being an influencer or the like, because that same type of isolation can certainly occur. And it's I don't know whether you call it micro celebrity or any number of things. I worry for people who see an opportunity to make a living and to receive accolades, but potentially be famous, and don't see the downside of it, because it's not often shared.
Well, that's why we asked you, because I'm sure you've seen a lot of it firsthand, right? And there's the glamorous side, and then there's like, I think all the time, and listen, we're grateful for any kind of like listener attention. That's not to say we're not so happy with people who pay attention to what we're doing, but it is a little scary sometimes if you're out somewhere and you think you're just with your family, and all of a sudden people pop in, they're taking pictures and this and that. And it doesn't happen frequently, but I can see on a mass scale, like that's got to be unnerving at some point. It's hard to live a normal life.
Yeah. I can't speak for myself because I'm in my day-to-day, I'm pretty anonymous, but experiencing it as a son with a very famous parent who couldn't go anywhere without being recognized. Right? But in a large part, my dad decided to grow up, to spend, to make home the Bay Area.
So you got away a little bit.
Yeah, and in San Francisco, you just see people on the street. It's not a thing, LA, New York, Tokyo, that's a whole different ball game. But I think there was an opportunity to be afforded some privacy, and I think that's challenging in this day and age when we're hyper connected with the world through social media and the like. And if our public lives and our private lives are undifferentiated, it can create all these major issues. I really, really worry about the well-being and mental health of Gen Z, who grew up wired into their mobile phones, who grew up just wired, just Instagram mainlined into their systems from the minute they get phones, TikTok, what have you. It's challenging because there's not a lot of resources to say, hey,
it's too new. It's too new.
Yeah, it's too new. Hey, find ways to develop healthy mental health hygiene associated with using these platforms.
I think that there's going to be a rehab for addiction to social media soon. I think we're going to see rehabs opening for that.
I wouldn't be surprised if it happened this year, maybe next year.
Yeah, especially with the pandemic. There is a huge influencer that posted something that, a lot of people found inappropriate. It was inappropriate, but the amount of hate that she got was so disgusting. It was almost like she was a robot and didn't exist. And I was talking to Michael and I said, this influencer is probably in her room in the dark, curled up, not eating or answering her phone. She's probably so depressed because of all this hate. And we both said it's going to take someone like her doing something horrible to herself for people to wake up and realize that what you say through a screen has impact on people.
Well, yeah, I mean, absolutely. And there's a cyberbullying consideration. I think that's a very real thing. I never experienced it because I wasn't really that active on social media and the like until, I'm still not that active, but until recently. For me, it's very advocacy focused, but I think, I see my family, my siblings, my cousins who have dealt with cyberbullying firsthand.
You can come back anytime and talk about mental health. You're incredible. Thank you so much for coming on, Zak.